From the picture book that we just had for our Story for All Ages, entitled Faith by Maya Ajmera, Magda Nakasis, and Cynthia Pon. Just seeing all those images of children mostly and adults in cultural settings around the world and religious settings around the world was a really good way to remind me of how much I don't know. How much there is in the range of cultural, religious, racial, spiritual practice, religious practice, and how much we have to learn. There is the distinctiveness that was certainly on display. I love the one that surprised me most a little bit was the Easter image from Guatemala. I don't know that I've ever thought of a black-faced bull being an Easter image, right? But also we got to see in the storybook what is common among us. Reflection, dressing for a moment, offering prayer, offering candles, and much more. For some of this month and into next month, we're taking a moment to the themes of the services are going to follow on some of our Unitarian Universalist core values. One of the things we've done is try to be more visible and more present about what is Unitarian Universalism. And this is an opportunity to do that. In pluralism, in particular, I think it's really important to begin where we are, who we are. If you think about this, if you're familiar with the movie Dirty Dancing, you need to know where your dance space is in order to be with somebody else's dance space, right? So where is ours from a faith perspective? And talk about that in the basics of Unitarian Universalism, which is its own tradition. I love people kind of wonder, like, so is this something new? Is this something just like cobbled together from all kind of different, a smorgasbord, if you will? No, it's really its own tradition. And it's been based in Christian history for centuries. And it's been opening up to be more of its own faith tradition in the last 100 years or so. Now, one of our core practices is that there's no expectation of any one way to articulate belief or faith or value. And we also have core premises that we hold true. How we talk about these is as individual as each of us, and I'm just going to offer, having grown up in Universalism, being a third generation UU, we have as many ways of saying this as at least double as many people in the room. We have at least twice as many people in the room and online and so on. Now, most recently, we've been talking about some of the core values in Unitarian Universalism. There was a long process, multi-year process that talked with the congregations and members and so on that said, how do we want to articulate what is most important to us today? And that was finally approved back in 2024. And now we have what we call our Unitarian Universalist values that are centered in love. And Colin, if you could show us, this is one of the many ways that we kind of show the core values. We've gone kind of fun and graphic images in this day and age. And core values, one, love at the center of all things. And we affirm transformation, the possibility of evolving and becoming, that revelation is continuous. We affirm equity, that each person has inherent worth and dignity. We understand pluralism, where we draw from many sources and we enrich each other with respect and love. We appreciate interdependence, knowing that everything is deeply, profoundly connected. The earth, all the creatures, all the humans, all that is. We affirm justice. We recognize how the world is broken in so many ways, and we want to do everything we can to be more whole, to be more right with one another. And lastly, we affirm generosity, the ways that we give materially, but also very much in spirit. We'll be talking more about the gifts of the Spirit and generosity next Sunday. And already in looking at the values we've talked about in April, for our kickoff, we were centered in love, love out loud. Uh, Last Sunday with the Earth Day service, that was about interdependence. This Sunday is pluralism, and so on. All right, thank you, Colin. Now, let me say a little more about pluralism, because what we did with these values is not just say, hey, we believe a nice thing, but we also made a commitment to it. In pluralism, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. And we covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. And in living that, we are inspired by many faiths, by many sources, by traditions and practices. Again, revelation is open. There is no one text that says everything and how it is. Truth comes from a wide range of poetry, from scripture, culture, history, science. We love science, right? From nature, definitely love nature. From people, from one another, and simply from our direct experience of life. And we do this practice of pluralism. It's kind of in someone who grew up, this is kind of the water in which I swim, but it's really good to be paying attention to it as well. And we do this not just for the novel and shiny things. I mean, because there's a lot of shiny things on the table, right? We could just kind of like say, oh, I like this one, and I like this one, and I like this one. But then we wouldn't necessarily have relationship or depth or understanding or history. We want to have an informed understanding, to uh, have a conversation with where these different items come from. I'll tell you about one of them that I didn't say before. This is actually this congregation's historic piece. This is one of the symbols that's historic in Universalism, which this congregation is historically Universalist. This is from the Humiliati, a group of clergymen from earlier in the 20th century. And it was very much deeply invested in the Christian traditions, but put the cross off center. Take the note. The cross is not in the middle of everything. The cross is off center because that allows for that sense of humility that we don't know everything. We allow the mystery to show up. Part of our challenge in working for pluralism, I think, is well expressed in the story, is the range among us, the range of human expression, the range of human manifestation. One of our wonderful elders, now ancestors, the Reverend Marjorie Bowens Wheatley, who was an African American Unitarian Universalist minister, she challenged us to stretch and get out of our comfort of familiarity and thinking we know enough. And she talks about racial diversity and so much more with her question, why would we intentionally work for diversity? And she says, why should we intentionally work for diversity? And the responses to this question vary widely. Of course, hard demographic realities suggest much, she says, but for me, beyond any demographic or sociological justification, there is a theological imperative. Affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every human being means working to create spaces of worship where all who subscribe to a liberal approach to religion can not only feel welcome, but enter into worship settings that reflect the cultural realities of we the people. Congregations that reflect the pluralism of our society are one step in the beginning to transcend the social boundaries that divide each from one another and from all that is, which some of us call God. The task ahead is arduous. And indeed, diversity is one of the most challenging tasks we ever undertake. What we are dealing with is not simply racial and ethnic diversity, but a paradigm shift that is rooted in a commitment to growth in a pluralistic community, as well as readiness for an acceptance of cultural change in our congregations. The encounter with diversity in all its forms is an opportunity to be different on the other side, to have oneself be transformed, in fact. Now, as I've said in other moments, becoming more diverse in culture and race and class, as well as theology, is not about meeting numbers. It is about becoming the beloved community here on earth. Listening closely enough to understand, even when we maybe don't quite get it. That is practicing diversity. Practice can be as simple as an atheist and a theist talking about God or not God, or sympathizing with religious trauma. So, in this practice of pluralism, I've been bringing forth a couple of questions for myself, including what do I think I know and what don't I know? What am I expecting? And then afterwards, what happened? What happened? And how am I different as a result of this encounter? What do I think I know and what don't I know? What am I expecting? What happened? And how am I different? Sometimes these conversations are very complicated and may not be resolved in this lifetime. These are ongoing individual, but also generational and international conversations. And here's the example. I was a guest with the Jewish Federation yesterday. At the temple, they were celebrating the anniversary of the founding of Israel in 1948. Several people from Israel were able to travel here to the States on short notice, given the wars now happening in that area. These guests shared stories of loss. They shared deaths in their families and life under frequent bombardment. They also shared the power of community to give life meaning and to keep them going. We had wonderful food, and we shared a small ritual to mark the end of the Shabbat in Jewish practice. And I was also there in the knowledge that there are other perspectives about this founding, especially that of Palestinians and their allies. So rather than a celebration, this anniversary marks the period of the beginning of the Nakba, the catastrophe that includes the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their homes in that land, and how the Nakba continues today with ongoing death and violence. And this is also held in the equally complicated attacks on the Jewish community, anti Semitism being weaponized to try to quell and bring to heel some of our universities and other systems to curb freedom of speech, and much more. So I brought my questions into this complicated moment. And I was grateful for the chance to hear people tell their story, both what was said and what was not said. And all along, I was still wondering, how on earth did we get here? That was kind of an additional question. How did we get here into this deeply, profoundly difficult, horrifying moment? And what's also was present were the distinctions between culture and history, politics and religious practice. I think many of the people who were there weren't necessarily religious. Many were secular. And they participated in the Shabbat ritual that marks the end of that sacred time on Saturday evening, the Havdalah. The practice of the end of Shabbat includes filling a cup to its brim, usually with wine, lighting a braided candle, saying a prayer, and passing bags of spices so that each person could breathe in the scent. The full cup is for joy. The spices are to soothe the soul as the Shabbat ends. The braided candle with multiple wicks represents how multiple aspects of our lives come together. And the prayer is both to honor what has been attained during the Shabbat, but also to honor what is to come in the week. The ritual ends with snuffing the candles and wishing each other that good week. It is lovely in its simplicity and how it touches on real truths in our lives. The ritual also contains a mix of emotions coming at the end of an evening of witness and loss and connection and profoundly unnamed stories. So I will continue to ponder. I don't have any good answers coming from last night, and I don't necessarily expect to. But I will continue to ponder, thinking that my questions might be becoming a little bit of a mantra, something to return to as its own practice. What do I think I know? And what don't I know? What am I expecting? What happened in that moment? How am I different as a result of this encounter? And then another question. How is this moment connected to the people and to the community? And where shall we go from here? In pluralism, we say, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And we embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. We hold so many things true all at once. And as is simply the human experience, we live with the complexity of it and with the unansweredness and with the unresolved nature of all being. So let us go forth into this moment, into our good week, to learn, to be open, to welcome, and to love. Amen.